Hey, hello everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome Wizard World fans and welcome to comic book nerds all over the galaxy. My name is Tony Kim. Welcome to the Wizard World virtual experiences. And my name is Tony. I'm the owner of the sophisticated fan apparel company called Hero Within. And we are streaming to you live on Twitch and Facebook and YouTube and I don't know, maybe MySpace, I don't know part on MySpace or not. Bringing you that Comic-Con life to the comfort of your own home with these awesome panels. Just to remind you guys, in addition to these panels, we have exclusive experiences like one-on-one private chats and video custom recording messages and autographs. And so if you go on to like wizardworldvirtual.com, you'll kind of see like all the opportunities and experiences that you can check out throughout the week for like this panel and for other panels throughout the year. Uh, uh, I'm super excited to be able to join you today with this panel that's very near and dear, close to my heart. We'll talk about diversity within pop culture. So much has happened over the course of not just this past year, but also just kind of this past decade in the pop culture space. And then when it comes to representation and diversity, and I can't think of a more important conversation to have. And I'm so honored to have a panel of awesome guests to sort of share the conversation with. And so, hey guys, how's it going, everybody?
Hi.
Hey, Tony. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Before we jump into some of the questions, I just wanted to ask you all, like, do you remember when we used to all gather together at something called Comic-Cons and nerd outs and all that? And I truly miss each of you all. I feel like it's, even though it's only been the pandemic's been about a year, it feels like it's been like a decade since I've seen like any of you. And so thank you for joining us for this conversation.
So it's been a bit wibbly wobbly.
Is right.
Past year. Timey wimey.
Yeah. So let's do this. As we just to start off, let's get our fans a context as far as kind of who you are and what you do in your sort of industry, your space. For myself, again, my name is Tony Kim, and I started out doing blogging for Crazy for Comic-Con. That's kind of like where I started in the Comic-Con space. And a few years ago, I started a geek apparel company called Hero Within, where we do like kind of subtle and sophisticated fan apparel. And we've been going for a few years. It's been a very awesome experience. In fact, I'm wearing our 13th Doctor hoodie because Doctor Who is all about inclusion and diversity, and so I couldn't think of anything more appropriate to represent. So that's me. Let me kick it over to Angelique. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Angelique Roche. I actually got started in nerd space writing blogs under a pseudonym and eventually joining Black Girl Nerds and moving on and doing some work in the podcasting space way back 8-9 years ago. I don't know. Time is very confusing. And currently I do production, writing, hosting. I've hosted stuff for Ace Comic Con. I've done stuff for New York University. I'd like across the board, like folks talking in their space, particularly zombies, which I'm a big fan of, as well as Doctor Who, Marvel, and I had a show called called Radical Geeks with a friend of mine, the Blurred Girl. And so literally anything folks can geek out about, I love it because I think that is like genuine and authentic and folks being able to relate and connect to what I'm not the first person to say it, but what I really like to like reiterate, which is like our modern mythology of superheroes. And so, I love it. And I've particularly gotten more and more into what does it mean to have authentic and genuine inclusion and diversity, and not just skin tone, but ethnicity, religious background, geography, culturally. And so, so I get to have a little fun bringing joy to people.
Very cool. Peter, how about you?
Well, my first entree into geekdom was reading wuxia novels written by my father. So wuxia is the martial arts fantasy genre. So I geeked out on that. I'm a big Marvel fan, so comic books, but my profession was actually in politics.
No.
So I was trained to work in politics. I was first mentored by the first Black mayor of LA, Tom Bradley, who gave me a shot as a really young man.
Wow.
I went on to represent him on Capitol Hill. Then I went into the State House and I worked in the Latino movement as one of the only Asian faces, marching and organizing. I was ready to run for office for myself when I had this awakening. I was in charge of the California Committee on the Entertainment Industry. And having done things like Rebuild LA and just really a lot of meaningful multicultural work, this light bulb went off in my head that all my political bosses, as powerful as they were, really struggled to get their message out and really get people to feel. And then I just had an appreciation for storytelling, for pop culture as kind of the tip of the spear for change. And I said, that's what I want to do. So for the past 15 years, I've been a movie producer. This is my 8th venture. So I've learned how to produce movies, finance movies, make content, technology, and then I've settled on my first love. This past year, I launched Immortal Studios, which is, we're building our own interconnected hero universe based on kind of heroes that come from this genre called wuxia, except our heroes are very inclusive. People who, because it's a native of China and Asia, you're going to see a lot of Asian representation come through, but that's also connected to the authentic traditions. We're also proud that this year we're launching the heroes that taught me and mentored me. We're going to have Black heroes, we're going to have Latino heroes, we're going to have people from all different ethnic backgrounds, and kind of like what the previous speaker was saying really is, I think one of the problems of underrepresentation is that everything you throw out there has to represent everybody until you get massive amounts out there. Right. You're not going to have total inclusion. So it's something I'm excited about. We're onto our second property, which I've just written myself. So massive career change, but I'm so happy to be here because this is coming home to a conversation that I've been part of for quite some time.
Yeah, awesome. Very awesome. Ivy, how about you?
Well, my name is Ivy Doomkitty. I'm an international cosplayer, published model. And I usually, in the before times, travel around to the conventions and meet fans and do photo ops and autographs and things like that. And panels on body confidence and inclusivity within our community, which is something that I absolutely love advocating for. Been doing that for, well, it would be 9 years now. And it's been really great, like just really being able to focus on those things and see the community grow in the way that it has.
Yeah, awesome. I think we have to have a term like, you know, how the BC AD, BC, the before Corona, the BC days, you know.
Yeah.
And then Ali, how about you?
Hey everyone, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are, or evening. I have no idea. I have no idea where we are and when we are. I've just in this room all day. My name is Ali Matu. I am a clinical psychologist by training. I grew up being a super socially anxious kid. I remember one day I came home and I looked at myself in the mirror in the bathroom because that was the only place I got privacy. And I was like, why am I the only brown kid in my class? And the only thing that gave me a sense of hope in the future was Star Trek. And that was my entry into nerddom. I went deep into Star Trek. That became just a love of science fiction and a love of not only the possibility of a better future, but also the cautionary stories that help us to understand the conflicts of right now. So what I do is I do a lot of things. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a YouTube channel called The Psych Show, or make psychology fun and easy to understand. In the BC times, I used to do mental health panels at different conventions and storytelling events and assemblies and just a lot of stuff that was not involving Zoom. And so that's a little bit of who I am. Right before the whole pandemic started, I was going to do a panel at WonderCon with my friend Larry Nemechek. That got canceled, and we turned that panel, which was going to be an exploration of Star Trek and mental health, we turned that into a weekly live stream and a podcast. So if you're interested, that's Life Support Live is the podcast, and every week we explore how Star Trek can help us to cope with these wacky times we live in. So that's a little bit of what I do.
Awesome. And Wendy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Lee. I am a host. I'm an actor. I'm a YouTuber. So on the YouTube channel, we talk about all the good nerdy stuff, movies, TV shows, comic books, other pop culture stuff, a little theme park stuff because I love that. And you may have also seen me previously on a Collider video. Currently hosting for Sideshow Collectibles, and I pop up here and there, in the nerd space, like Nerdist and things like that. So it's been a great last few years. I will say, like the BC, it's been really, really great. Last year and this year certainly has taught me how to pivot very, very quickly. And luckily, I feel like I get a grasp on technology quite quickly. So making the switch to everything virtual wasn't too much of a struggle, but there has been frustrations where I'm just yelling at my tech and I'm like, why don't you work?
Yeah.
But of course they don't answer. So just a little about me.
Yeah.
I'd be concerned if they did answer.
Throw them out the window.
What was
So
your
what-
hardest pivot this year? I'm curious what Wendy's hardest pivot was. You talked about pivoting this year. So what was the hardest one for you?
The hardest one was for me going virtual, going from in an office setting to not an office setting to working at home. And what I did for a while, aside from hosting and acting and all that stuff, and doing my own YouTube channel, which I've been doing for years, so that wasn't too much of a pivot. But the going from an office environment and with Collider, when I worked there, it was all nerd news, nerd stuff all day, every day. I was very used to coordinating, having talent come in for in-person interviews. And obviously that was a big no-no when, all this started in 2020. So that was a major shift that I didn't really know how to handle, because inevitably, now that we're in 2021, no one is really still doing in-person interviews. No one wants to travel.
Yeah.
So that unfortunately led me to not being able to have that job anymore, because my core job was to coordinate, the time of arrival, being the point of contact, making sure that they're comfortable, sitting in the interviews to just make sure, we're on time and things like that. So that was a hard pill to swallow a little bit, just because I loved not just the job itself, but I loved the people that I got to hang out with and work with every day for the last 5 years, and that kind of had to go away. So it was a bit unfortunate, but
Yeah.
you learn and you pivot and you figure out what is the next step for you. And I kind of put my entire energy into creating content for myself for the YouTube channel, and continuing to, luckily, thank goodness, for auditions and hosting opportunities were still there. So that was really, really good.
Yeah. So, one of my earliest memories in elementary school, I remember being like second or third grade. My parents had moved to this new area, and I remember two white kids came up to me and they asked me, "So, what are you, Chinese or Japanese?" And then I said, "Well, I'm Korean." And they said, "So is that Chinese or is that Japanese?" And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so that kind of began this whole journey for me as far as my cultural identity, like who am I, and am I more than just the color of my skin? So I want to ask you kind of briefly to go around and give us a little context as far as your cultural identity, like what did you grow up, kind of your understanding? I know it's a lot. I'm asking a lot in just a brief moment, but kind of like who you sort of identified with, and the ease of that, I guess, for you. And so for me, my parents had immigrated here from Korea about a year before I was born, and we landed in a small suburb in Texas, in Dallas, or off of Dallas. And I was the only Asian or any other in my whole school for many years. And I remember thinking I went through the whole sort of the immigrant it's a very common experience of realizing that I'm not like everyone else, and then rejecting my own culture, and then not wanting anything to do with it, and then sort of coming full circle and re-embracing it and seeing the beauty of it and just all that sort of stuff. And like Ali, Star Trek was sort of my first time I saw someone look like myself, as well as a diverse cast that really has strived for sort of peace and harmony in the future. And so that was sort of the thing that got me into pop culture way back when. And so now it's like something that's very, when we get into these conversations, something that's very near and dear to me, because it informed so much of who I was become, as an adult. So, but yeah, how about anybody else? Like, what's kind of, you want to share a little bit about your culture identity?
Kind of similar to Tony, I was born and raised in Taiwan, so I didn't come to the States until I was about 12 years old. One of the main struggles, aside from like the culture shock, was to learn the language. My English was really limited, as in I knew the ABCs, but not in the right order once I got past like F. But I knew that there were 26, so if I could keep them, it was great. And quite similar to you, Tony, it's like in school I showed up, at the time when I went to school, it was Florida, Miami, Florida, and very few Asian kids in school. So there were curiosities, and where you from? I got the same like, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? And I would say no, I'm Taiwanese, and I still get it, not as much now, but I do still get a little bit of this comment today, and I feel like it's a genuine like response. It's not, they're trying to, I hope they're not trying to troll me. So when I say I'm from Taiwan, and they go, oh my gosh, I love Thai food. And I was just be like, oh, okay. So, and then trying to, as a child with limited English, to explain that Thailand and Taiwan aren't the same country. I don't, in my opinion, really think we look the same. And then there was a lot of, I don't know if you guys ever watched the show, the ABC show, Fresh Off the Boat. So when Eddie Huang brought his mom's home cooked meal to his lunch table, opened it, and the kids were like, what is that? Looks like worm. It smells bad. Literally same experience, to the point where I asked my mom, can I just eat lunch at the school? And she was like, but don't you like the food? And it broke my heart, because I love her cooking. I miss it every day because she's not here, in the US with me. But I just didn't want to get like, I was trying to fit in as a kid, literally like trying to. So that was just a bit of the journey there. And then learning English, that was a bit of like a struggle. I would get pulled out of class and I would have to go to English as a second language, so I can kind of catch up and understand what everybody's trying to communicate to me. And then I would say someone that I identify with in media, I think it was the first time I went to the theaters, my mom took me to see Disney's animated Mulan. And I thought, that's a story that I definitely grew up with. And I thought, how awesome is it that they chose this story to show, and it was so much more about seeing someone that looked like me on screen. It was now this story that I knew was able to be shared with everybody, so they can kind of get a little bit of sense of like the culture and the traditions and why things are important. So I was really thrilled to have seen Mulan in theaters. Told all my friends to go see it. You have to go see it. It's the best movie ever.
Like, speaking of media and kids, like for me growing up, so my parents were Pakistani immigrants. My dad came here in the early 70s. My mom came here in the early 80s, and I was born a year after they both were here. But like, I didn't find many examples of like Pakistani American Muslim kids like growing up at all. And the show I sort of really got attached to in terms of like pop culture and what it's like to be American is Saved by the Bell. And there was no represon at all there.
There's a Lopez, Mario Lopez. That's
right. Mario Lopez. He's got his hair is dark. I wanted to be Zach Morris. Like for years and years and years, I wanted his sweaters. I wanted his hair. I wanted his cell phone, because that's what I thought was like a cool American kid. And I wanted to be a cool American kid. But what I got, instead of Zach Morris, I had Apu. Like so many times people were like, Apu, man, Apu. You're Apu, right? And I'm like, no, Apu's like Indian, I'm Pakistani. Like that didn't work. Like no, people still called me Apu. And then the one thing I held on to was Short Circuit. I don't know if anyone has watched Short Circuit, right? Yeah. I know, right? I know, Angelique. And then then I learned as an adult that the character that's supposed to be South Asian Short Circuit is a white dude wearing brown face. So there goes my childhood. So I kind of grew up for a very long time without really seeing myself reflected in the media that I loved. And there's this one scene in Star Trek 4 where there's like an uncle who's like a captain somewhere, like with a distress call, and I'm like, hey, we do exist in the 24th century. So it's been a long time coming. I think honestly, Tony, the time I felt most connected has been Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan. I'm like, oh my gosh, she is me. Like I don't have like mist powers, superpowers, but like, or mist induced superpowers, but that was the first time I felt like this character really represents the kind of life that I had.
Angelique?
So I identify most with being Creole, which means 12 billion things. But I actually is more than so I'm from Louisiana. Long story short, but I am fourth and fifth generation on one side of the family and Louisiana Creole on the other side of the family. So my father is Mexican, German, Haitian, and First Nations. So
Wow.
that's a lot. And as much as I love that side of the family, they very much wanted to be just American, which is great for them. I did not grow up with that experience. My father went to an HBCU, met my mother, and we settled outside of New Orleans, which is where his family lives. Which is a whole other conversation about that whole idea of fitting in and being American and whiteness, that I don't get a chance to talk about a lot. But let's just say they do not identify the way I identify on my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family is Louisiana Creole. We are Native American, French, and African descent, which is really where I identified a lot until I got to high school when I started listening to a lot of ska and watching a lot of things from California. And then I saw Clueless and I was like, that's it. That makes sense.
Whatever.
Me and Brittany, that's me. Overalls. And for, I did have an opportunity to see things like Uhura and Cleopatra Jones, but I remember for the first time watching PBS and seeing Red Dwarf and seeing Lister and Cat. And I was like, wait, they're funny, non-perfect people. Because here's the thing about Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Do not get me wrong. Star Trek is great. Everyone's perfect.
Totally.
Star Trek.
Totally.
No one is like, they left all the imperfections on the cutting room floor.
Unless you're talking about Deep Space Nine. People are pretty
I'm
imperfect.
talking about OG. I'm talking about original Star Trek.
Yes.
Yes, they have problems. Yes, they don't care, but they're perfect. They're perfect.
Yeah, I know.
They're beautiful, and there's no mess, and their quarters are always pristine. And I'm just like, yeah, I
The
don't
bad ones that left
necessarily
behind
relate.
on Earth, right?
I mean, yeah, sure, I guess.
Academy.
Yeah, well, then we got to the next generation, and life got a little bit better, and people got a little bit messier, and it made more sense. But when I was a kid, I really attached to Doctor Who and Red Dwarf. But ironically, the character that I related to most was not sci-fi, though the actress is like a genre queen, which is Cree Summer. I identify with Freddie Brooks from A Different World because Freddie Brooks was this kid who just didn't fit in, wasn't necessarily one thing, wasn't necessarily another thing, but definitely identify with being a person of color, being a Black woman, going to an HBCU, but was quirky and hippie. And it's what has been determined like back in the 90s as a boho, which is a bohemian Black person. So like Lenny Kravitz, Cree Summer, Lisa Bonet, like that whole like vibe. And for me, it was that place where I was like, oh wait, there are more of us. Cool. And then you realize she's Penny from Inspector Gadget, and you realize she voices you know, Codename Kids Next Door. You realize that she's in all of these movies that you love. And for me, that's when I started really like digging into this idea of, oh, there's more to sci-fi and genre and animation than just what I'm seeing on the screen.
Mhm.
It can be more, and I'm there if I dig a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting because in a very similar way, when I went to college, people were like, hey, and I do not use this term lightly, but there were definitely some terms that were used for my skin complexion that I wasn't ready for, because other people had categories that they wanted to put me in because I was Creole and it was the South. And it took me a long time to love my curly hair. Like the Spice Girls, Scary Spice did it for me. Thanks. Right. And I say all that to say, like, there is this beauty in representation, when you are kind of in that those cultural gaps, because Black people aren't a monolith. Like we aren't all the same. Like we don't all listen to hip hop. There are emo Black folks. There are Black folks who love ska. I wore Jinko jeans. 36 was
Yes.
probably the biggest I had. And, I rollerbladed, and, and it was one of those things. I sang musicals outside the
Yeah.
cafeteria. I was singing Rent before Rent went on tour. Like,
Yes.
right. So and I say that to say, like, I was really blessed to have a mom who did work at a HBCU. And so I got the full, and I went to an HBCU for undergrad and for law school. I got the full, like, what people consider to be the Black experience. And it's so great for me now that we have a vice president who went to an HBCU in the White House, right? Because again, it's that power of representation. And so for me, culturally, I feel like I won the lottery. Sometimes it doesn't always feel like it. When I was a kid, because there are these moments where we all kind of want to see ourselves and see ourselves fit in.
Yeah.
We want to be Cleopatra Jones. Tamara Dobson was queen. But it is really interesting. So like my background, and I'm really blessed because I had a writer in my family, an award-winning writer who based a lot of his books on my grandparents.
Mhm.
And so we got really lucky because we can go back and we can trace, because there has been research and study into our family. And that's not always true
Yeah.
of people who come from a Black heritage in the South. So, I think, for me, before I started rambling on about how cool it is to have a mom who's a storyteller and like kept that up, and then having my cousin who literally his life was telling stories, um, it's pretty incredible. But also, like, you know, if it wasn't for Freddie Brooks, like honestly, Cree Summer is for a lot of us like that queen.
Angelique, A Different World was where my love affair with round glasses with the flip up shades, that's where that began. So
Nice.
I had them. No,
loved them,
Dwayne
man.
Wayne had nerd
Dwayne,
swag for
yeah,
days.
he did. Peter, you shared a little bit about growing up. Can you briefly tell us a little bit more about your
Sure.
cultural identity?
Well, as an immigrant, I'm also an MIT that's made in Taiwan. So the first 9 years of my life, I was in a pretty culturally homogenous world. I didn't know that there was people who did not look like me surrounding me. And then I became an immigrant and I moved to South Africa. So
Wow.
going to Africa, where I was then considered an honorary white. So I was like, wow, people like aren't really, the world is a very big place and you're treated very differently. Then I went into a small African kingdom called Swaziland, where I was surrounded by Africans. And so it was like my world. And then after I left Swaziland, we went on this extended European tour. So I lived with all kinds of white people and different kinds of Western experiences. And then I landed in Hollywood as a 10-year-old, where it was probably one of the most diverse places on earth. Like we had the West Side Jews, we had the rich people from the Hollywood Hills, we had the Russians, the Armenians, the Latinos, the African Americans, all stripes of people just kind of living within this. So, that really gave me a really studied and quick experience. And because I talked a little bit about being a native of the wuxia genre, so I love martial arts movies. Like I grew up, I probably have watched thousands and I've read tens of thousands of martial arts books. So that was like plenty of representation for my culture. So I was kind of liberated to experiment and do all kinds of other things that an American teenager would. So I think I had a really deep breath. But then after I got into politics and looking, really examining at social structures, it was like, so I've arrived at a very steady place, having lived in most parts of the world. I would say I'm a global citizen first. I'm a human being, but I identify as a Chinese American, and not just American, but Chinese American. So I think part of what's wrong is nationalism of any kind. I think becomes incredibly problematic. So as I look at pop culture, I hold space for the world to come together, and that what we do in the pages and the stories that we do, we have a greater responsibility because our stories travel. It's not just for this conversation, but it's this conversation.
Yeah.
So that's the conversation that I'm holding space for. But I put myself forth as a product of East and West, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful. And Ivy.
I'm Latina. So my parents immigrated. Well, my mom from Ecuador, my dad from Mexico. So I'm a first generation here. I mean, we grew up in a very mid to low income area of LA, which was predominantly Latinos. So all I knew growing up was just Latinos. So I kind of like what you were just saying about not really like being exposed to other cultures and other ethnic backgrounds and things like that. It was very much the same thing until we moved to the desert part of California, which is predominantly white. And that was a shock to me because that was the very first time I experienced any kind of racism as a child. My mom and I and my other sister, Pam, we were at one of the stores out there at a grocery store. And this guy comes out and he's like, I fought for you to even be here. You know, you should, be thankful. You guys come into our country. And I'm like, Mom, what's going on? Like, I didn't understand what was going on. And she later, explained what was happening. But up until that point, it was almost like I was just like there was just these blinders where I didn't know that there was just this larger world with so many other people. So that being said, just all through growing up, like I looked up to the X-Men. Like it wasn't necessarily a person in terms of like an actual like human aside from my mother, but mostly it was the X-Men because they were so diverse and they were so different. And you could gravitate to any one character and they're just radically different from the next one. And I think that's just kind of been an ongoing thing with me, even growing up, into my adulthood. It's always just they've been my constant in that sense because of there's just so much representation. Anybody can like the X-Men and gravitate to any character because they're appealing to everybody. There's somebody there for everyone.
It's about being X-Men is about being different and being
yeah.
different.
Your difference is what gives you your strength. So let's jump into, we have such a diversity of not just backgrounds, but then also just industries represented here. And so how have you seen, specifically in the past, couple of years, how have you seen the issue of diversity and representation sort of change or evolve in your particular area, your industry or your sphere of influence? So what's that been like for you?
I would say two big things that I saw that really changed my whole belief of what's possible. The first one is gotta be Black Panther, because the ongoing narrative in Hollywood is that Black films don't travel, they don't open, and they're niche-y. That film came along and blew everything away, every preconceived notion, and also it was culturally authentic, and that people celebrated it, and then not just African Americans or Africans, but everybody celebrated it. So that was like a touchstone event, and I think it did change the industry forever. The second thing that's closer to the community that I work a lot with the Asian American community is Crazy Rich Asians. The other perspective was that people who look like me and several of us on this panel, you guys don't top line movies. Movies cannot be about you, cannot be about your experience. And if you're going to do it, you'll gross maybe $3 or $4 million in an art house movie and then go away. But the fact that it opened, to pop cultural stardom, I think those two things really were two lightning rods that changed Hollywood. Yeah. The executives were shaking in their boots because they said, we don't understand this. How do we? So I think those two big things really made a big change.
Yeah, I remember seeing that movie, and there was a scene near the beginning where they're all in the Chinese or the Singapore open market. There's a group of 4 friends together in open market, sharing, talking about life, and just enjoying each other. And that was the first time I had seen people that I would hang out with them, and they look like me, and they look like my friends. First time I've seen them represented in a major motion picture, and that's 2018. It's the first time to see something like that. Sure, there's other films, smaller, independent, whatever, but the fact that such a major film, to see it represented, it was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I've definitely seen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on what Peter and Tony were saying about Crazy Rich Asians. Was a book that I had read, prior to the movie coming out. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to do this, Asian cast and romantic leads. And that's something I don't feel like we saw enough of, is Asian male having the potential of being the romantic lead. And I felt like it wasn't really talked about as much as it should have been until Crazy Rich Asians. Now we are able to see, Henry Golding in multiple films playing the romantic lead, which I love, and I want to see more of that. The same token goes for the show Fresh Off the Boat, centered around an Asian American family. And I feel like there's so many people like myself, like a lot of you guys can relate to that story, the immigration story, the one lone kid that's like no one else, I don't look like anybody else. And all these experiences need to be talked about. And I think media is a really great way to help people tell that story, feel related to a character or anything. And then now what we've progressed now to today, and we are having finally Simu Liu get to play Shang-Chi. That is I am so looking forward to that movie. I can't wait to see. I feel like I hopefully can see this in theaters. I don't remember when it's coming out, but I want to
theater. What is that? What's that?
What's that? How do I
I hear that's a place where they've closed the doors. They put the popcorn machine in a cage just for a a little bit. Just for a little bit.
Remember that?
I
hear they're opening them up again, maybe one day.
Oh my god!
Outside.
I
go to drive-ins.
Drive-ins, yeah. I never actually have gone through a drive-in until last year.
It's great. You should do it.
First time ever.
Never done
it.
You're in
LA. I don't know where you are, but you should.
I'm in LA as well. But also, I learned this the hard way. You should turn your car on at least once during a drive-in, or your battery dies, and then you sit there like a fool.
Oh no!
To note, at the Santa Monica airport, they do front covers on your car.
What's
so
that?
You can keep your car on. So they're light covers.
Oh.
So check before you go to the drive-in. This is just a tangent. But they'll put light covers on the front of your car and the back of your car, so you can keep your car on if your car is the kind that you can't turn the lights off if it's turned on.
All right, on.
Some people's cars you can't turn them off.
Love it.
Just pro tip.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Can I jump in with something more of a serious note, because I know we're running out of time here. It's just that this very moment, Asians are under attack in North America right now. There's been, just so many instances of people being attacked out of nowhere. And we're starting to see the narrative that's been used to divide us really turn into violence. And it's something happening in real time. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned, I just want to shout out in this panel, is that this is not just about people who look a certain way. It's about us really standing together. I think that the big lesson of Black Lives Matter is that their lives matter, and that just because their experiences may not mirror our own, but the fact that they're suffering and that you have to stand with people. We have to stand together and call it out, however it happens, whether you're identified with it or not. So I just want to say to everybody, who's watching right now, if you see something happening down and that maybe there's not an Asian person, because Asian Pacific Islanders are about 6% of North America, but 60% around the world. It's easy to think that it doesn't matter. It just really does. If you see it go around you, do something, say something, stand up, be a hero, and champion something, because it's really about us standing together. And just want to say, it's really incredibly important that you do that.
And I think that makes a really good point. And just like to tag on to that, this idea of you have to focus on and help those who are most impacted, period. And I think a lot of times people forget that if you lift those who are most impacted, most disenfranchised, most pushed to the side, you are lifting all of us. And that shifts and that changes and that moves. And I think that's what just to kind of tag on to that, that's the idea that we aren't all a monolith, but we all deserve to be treated with human dignity, period. And it's this idea of equity. Because a lot of people are like equality, and I'm like, no, equity. That means everybody having that same fair shot. And thank you so much for shouting that out, because one of the things I will say and kind of answer your question, Tony, and to like hit on this is like, there are folks who are out there who are asking these questions, who are asking why people aren't in the room, who are putting people in the room, who are creating casts like Black Panther and Luke Cage and these different shows that are putting women of color directors to change the narrative, or just saying, this writer's room is not diverse. This production is not diverse. This and answering these cultural tropes that have previously been put forward. But what I will also say is, like, I think folks think this is something new. They think that this has never happened before. And I think one of the things that's been highlighted on this panel is that this is a retrogression back to where we thought we had moved past. And that requires there to be constant work, constant questions asked, and constant narratives that are pushing the needle forward and changing people's misconceptions and shifting the framework. But also good people have to speak, because there will always be those people who choose violence or choose hatred or choose negativity. But if good people speak, and I think that's what I love about what you just said, if good people speak, if good people stand up, if good people fight back, instead of being silent and saying, oh, that isn't me, that person doesn't look like me, I'm not in this fight, I'm going to stay over here, that's when we see the major proliferation of what's happening right now.
I'll tell you what
And
made
I
me
love that you
of
said
Tony Kim, our moderator. He doesn't know this because I was at one of his booths. I think this was probably the Long Beach convention last year, maybe the last one. I think somebody asked him like who he's a fan of, and he gave this really impassioned speech about Wonder Woman. I overheard this. And here's a guy, you think he's going to say, oh, Shang-Chi, Bruce Lee. I mean, that's fine. But the fact that here's a guy who really stood up for women and really giving something that I felt was incredibly heartfelt. And I had to do a double take on him. That I like this guy. Really standing together, right? It's really standing together and letting that an ounce of division come between us. And so I think it's really...
I want to, this conversation is like so important. I wish we had like 2 more hours. And I want to say to everyone, if you feel like helpless, like what can I possibly do when all of this stuff is happening? One of the big changes in my field, Tony, is the idea of parasocial relationships, that your relationship with these characters who aren't real is important and it matters, and it can validate your experiences. It can teach you about the plight of other people. It can help you get connected to larger communities. So one thing I think everyone can do right now is diversify your media. Like take a close look at what are the stories you're looking at? What are the views that aren't out there that you aren't exposed to? What are some of your blind spots? Because now whatever your streaming platform, there's shows like Gentified, which was a show I loved this year, or I've been watching a lot of K-drama, so I've been I've been in that world too. But there's There's stuff like I May Destroy You on HBO. There's so many stories that can give you to a very different viewpoint and can help move the needle forward on your understanding of different communities. So one thing we can all do, even if you're stuck at home, you can't do anything, diversify your media, get exposure to different stories, different creators, viewpoints that you haven't seen before.
Well, let's take a few minutes and just do some shout outs. I mean, whether it's a comic, TV show, like you've already mentioned some, movies, web series, documentaries, whatever. Let's just go around the horn. Does anyone have one that they want to recommend for our fans that are watching?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I have two. I'll do it really quick. One is a podcast that I absolutely love. It is called Asian Boss Girls. It is run by Helen, Melody, and Janet. And it kind of started out with their whole message is Asian women are sort of lacking in media outlets, especially like kind of represented when it comes to like fashion, beauty, blogging, like, you know, so for them, because they all kind of were working in the industry in one way or another, they really wanted to talk about their experience as Asian American women in the industry and how like these corporate jobs and it kind of springs off into, it's gone beyond, and they've gone, you know, so many conversations. So I would say that's definitely one to check out. Another one is the movie Minari, which is, I think you can probably, by A24, I think you can watch it now, basically about a Korean American family migrating or immigrating to Arkansas and in searching of the American dream. It is, you'll cry. So bring some tissues with you, but love the cast, love the director and the writing. And I think it's definitely worth several watches, repeated watches.
Very cool.
I think for me, I would say Black Girls Create. They are, I think there is a new, and I'm looking it up. There is a new collection, These Bewitching Bonds, that they just came out, which is an anthology of stories that they're putting together. Fire Magazine, Black Speculative Fiction. I love it. It's amazing. I know there's more dope stuff coming. I feel like there's supposed to be a digital conference coming. I'm not gonna lie, you should just look it up. It's FIYAH. And then also Megascope, which is a line of graphic novels that are coming out from John Jennings that are Black, mostly Afrofuturism novels. If you don't know John Jennings, you should just know John Jennings. He does incredible work. I have like 5 of his pieces behind me. He's an artist and writer, a professor, and the Black Girl Nerd live on Twitch, which is hosted by one of my former co-conspirators, Kara Mahorn. Literally every single week, you new actors, actresses, cosplayers, writers, comic book writers, speculative fiction across the board. So if you want to learn about more stuff, particularly in the Black community, like those are like and honestly, one of my favorite like obsessions is Fire Magazine because I love speculative fiction, and you know, that's the beauty of seeing ourselves in the future is being able to get those different perspectives of what a future looks like.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, I'm going to jump in. I've heard really promising things about this new creator. His name is Peter Shiao. He runs a company called Immortal Studios that's bringing an interconnected wuxia martial arts fantasy universe. And tomorrow, their second version of the second book of the Storyverse launches tomorrow. It's called Chronicles of the Immortal Swordsman. It's available on Kickstarter. Cool. So I want to invite all of you who are interested in checking out, you know, taking this ancient genre that's been around for thousands of years, that's fully modernized, connected to this moment in time. So that website is immortal-studios.com. And we want to awaken the hero in everybody through the stories we tell.
Mm-hmm. I was on a panel with a guy, class act, really nice guy.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about him. I don't know. I mean, it's like positive vibes out there.
So as we can, anyone else have any recommendations? Anything else?
Just a real quick, Belief in Fatherhood is a YouTube channel run by a Black family of vloggers, and I love their content. They have a video about explaining police brutality to their young boys, and it breaks your heart. And if you don't understand what this experience is like, watch their YouTube channel. Oh my gosh, they're really amazing. Gentified, I think, is a really great story that weaves together socioeconomics, culture, gentrification. It's wonderful. And then Insecure, if you haven't seen Insecure on HBO, watch all the seasons. It's an amazing show.
Yeah. With our remaining few minutes, is there one thing that you want to see change in your industry, or one sort of next evolutionary step? I mean, we've come far, but then we've also, it feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there's so many challenges. And so what do you see as like the next sort of big step within, pop culture, whether it's in your industry or not? Like what's something that you want to see change or happen?
Well, I think I heard Peter say this earlier, is this idea of when there are more folks represented from different backgrounds, there gets to be a diversity of that demographic within that space. And I think that's something that a lot of us are waiting for, right? Not to be the one, not to be the one in the room, not to be the
Yeah.
one on screen, not to be the one in the space, but because that's so much pressure on, even if it's a fictional character, it's so much pressure on that one character to represent everyone. But when you have more than just the one, you get, that saturation within a space that allows for that increased level of diversity and relatability within stories, right? That was the great thing about Freddie Brooks. She wasn't the only one, so she got to be diverse. She got to be different because she wasn't representing everyone. I mean, for First Nations on that show, she was kind of, that's a different conversation, but in general, I think it's the next level of diversity is continuing to understand that, cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds aren't a monolith, that people aren't a monolith, that we're complex and diverse, and that, yes, there are things that are true within tropes, but that doesn't mean that it's true for everyone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
For me, what I see is having more diverse buyers. I think a lot of voices are coming out, but to have decision makers not representing these monoliths, but people with real buying power and decision making capabilities, not within these large platforms. So, as an Asian American owner and a studio head, I want to see more diverse people who can say yes, without running things up the flag. So I think it's about taking leadership and taking ownership of the industry.
Yeah, and related to that, on a consumer level, ultimately, all these big monolithic industries listen to the dollar. When it comes down to it, they listen to the dollar. And so, how you spend your money, who you support, how you sort of like engage and consume your media and pop culture, that's incredibly important, and whether it's movies or if it's content or it's merchandise or whatever it is, like by directing your dollars to support diverse content creators or artists, that goes a tremendous way. And so I think that's another big step I would like to see, is that that consumers just continue to support and push those type of artists in our industry.
And kind of mirroring what you're saying, Tony, I think also, like if we're in a position to where we have a platform to be able to also push different creators, artists, in whatever field they may be, really like pushing, them from also pushing creators from all sorts of backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds and everything. On those platforms that we have the ability to utilize, and using that as just like an additional tool to get those names out and to promote them as well, I think would just really help expose so many different backgrounds to different audiences as well, that otherwise would not have seen that work or that book or that film, whatever it may be.
I love that. I love that perspective. And if you're watching this and you don't see your story reflected back, tell it.
Yeah.
I mean, we now live in a world where you can share your story. You can get good at the craft of storytelling, and that might get bought up by someone. I mean, that's kind of how we got Insecure. So if you're watching this, please find a way to tell your story, especially those stories that haven't been told.
Yeah.
And then put your money in supporting these creators. Please go watch Minari. It's Wendy, it's beautiful movie. I just watched it last night.
Yeah.
And those box office numbers really matter, especially
Really
on an opening weekend like this.
Yeah. So as I conclude, I just want to read from someone who's watching our channel right now. Maria says, as a writer who immigrated to the U.S. as a child, whose native language is not English and who use books and stories to escape, I appreciate this important discussion. So much it resonates with me and lets me know that I'm not alone. Thank you. And I think that's what it really comes down to for all of us, is that we're all storytellers, not only who's on this panel, but then those fans who are watching. We're all storytellers. And I think by sharing our story, by sort of sharing the plight as well as the possibility, it does, bit by bit, it changes the world. And so the discussion has gone a long way, but it's got so much further to go. And so I'm hoping that even though this panel was a short hour, I'm hoping we can continue the conversation and have more of them. It looks like from the chat that a lot of people would be interested in that. And so, but I want to thank all of our panelists. Real quickly, around the horn, Anjali, where can people find more of you on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can find me at AngeliqueRoche.com. That's AngeliqueRoche.com. Also, Angelique Roche on Twitter, Angelique Roche Official on the Instagram, because someone took my name on the Instagrams. That's how it happens. I'm also on TikTok, but that's my fun place, so you don't have to follow me there. There's nothing but silliness there.
And Peter, where can they find you?
Well, the company is immortal-studios.com, and my personal handle on Insta is Ancient Futurist. Ancient Futurist.
Whoa.
And Ivy?
All social media platforms under Ivy Doom Kitty, including Twitch. I am a Twitch streamer also. So.
Cool.
Yay.
Wendy?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Wendy Lee Zaney, SZANY, that is how it's spelled. And on YouTube, the Movie Couple channel, just search that up, and we do a lot of fun nerdy stuff. Talk about WandaVision a lot lately, so it's because I'm currently obsessed with it.
So good. It's so good.
So good.
I'm at Ollie Matu on social and the Psych Show on YouTube.
Awesome. And for me, you could find me at Crazy for Comic-Con on Twitter. And then my company Hero Within is at herowithinstore.com. So definitely check it out. We want to do a special shout out for Wizard World. Thank you for hosting this. Go on wizardworldvirtual.com to find the replay of this panel, as well as a bunch of other contents. Definitely check back. And so thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.